Hello guys, Julian from Seedstars World, all the way from Ho Chi Minh still. We're sticking around for a few more days before heading to Manila. And I'm right here with Christopher Zorbist, who is a serial entrepreneur here in Vietnam, and he's also the Deputy Director of the National University of Vietnam. Chris, could you tell us a bit more about yourself? What's your background?
Yeah, sure. So I first came to Vietnam in 2006. And I came from the U.S., so I was born and grew up in the U.S. My mother happened to be from Vietnam originally, so that was the reason why I first decided to come here and check out Vietnam. And the moment I hit the ground here, I could feel this energy. I'm sure you guys have probably felt it too. But this very entrepreneurial, new thinking kind of energy here in Ho Chi Minh City, especially from the young people. And I think that's what made me want to stay here for a while. And so I've been here about 8 years. I've been teaching entrepreneurship part-time in universities, as well as starting my own businesses. So since I've been here, I've had about 4 companies that have started in the past 8 years, and 3 of them will be this year.
Wow, congrats. So you moved, you said 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. We've seen the scene now, mm-hmm. Which is just emerging. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to understand how that was 8 years ago.
Oh,
was there anything?
Yeah, very, very different scene 8 years ago in terms of tech startups. Right. And in terms of infrastructure here. There's been tremendous development in terms of both real estate development, office buildings going up. I think there's probably 10 or 12 very large office complexes around the city now, whereas back in 2006 there was maybe 3 or 4. And I would also say that the attitude and the creativity of the entrepreneurs who want to start tech companies here has multiplied by 100 times. Back in 2006, the internet was still pretty new to most people. There weren't smartphones back then. And since the internet and smartphones have just taken off in Vietnam, as I'm sure you guys have seen the statistics, young population here just eager to snap up anything that's new, and they're very tech savvy. Right. So that has all fed into this real desire of young people in Vietnam to start tech companies.
So when you say young people, you mean, you teach Entrepreneurship University, so it's students?
Yes. No, not just students, though. So when I first started teaching, I was teaching undergrads, and my first students from those first classes have long graduated since now. So they've been out in the workforce for 3 or 4 years, and for the most part, they don't start companies right out of university like we do in the U.S. Most people here are a little bit more conservative and strategic about that. They go out and work, they get some experience first, and then all the while they're kind of gathering the right knowledge and the right contacts to jump out and start their own company. So they're very smart about it here. Right.
And so we've been to places in Asia like Korea and Japan before, where the main threat, I would say, barrier to entrepreneurship was the fact that people want to have a safe job. Is it something that's so widespread in Vietnam? Like you want to have a safe job and you don't want to get out of it?
It's funny because I think the best sentiment that describes young Vietnamese people is that they want to have their cake and eat it too. So they want the stable job, and then they're so hardworking that at night and on weekends they'll go out and work away at their startups. So they're very, very industrious that way.
So a lot of the entrepreneurs you've seen, that's an interesting point. So a lot of entrepreneurs you've seen here, they work their job and they never really think of quitting it. They just do it like a second job. Startup.
Yep, is to start their own company. Yep.
That's incredible. So you think they work how many hours a week?
Oh, easily 10, 12 hours a day. Wow. And that probably includes weekends too. And they also have fun. I think Sunday, for the most part, people still take off. But I've even taught and facilitated workshops where 30 or so young Vietnamese all got together and wanted to do a design thinking workshop on a Sunday morning, and so we'll do that.
So that's something that we hear a lot about Vietnam, like very hard, people are extremely hardworking. Do you think it's something that's helped them to move to entrepreneurship in a certain way?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely, you can't get anywhere without working hard, and so I think the fact that Vietnamese people are willing to put in that extra time and effort and really gives them an edge in terms of starting successful businesses.
So back 8 years ago, you said there was not really much going on, and the smartphone penetration, internet starting to rise in the country. What are the very first entrepreneurs you've seen? What did they come up with? Copycats of like American products, or what kind of things?
You know, there's been a whole gamut, I think, of different startups that people have tried. I think you've seen both the copycat models as well as things that have been completely new. There was one startup in Hanoi that recently got a lot of good traction selling applications, mobile apps. You know, it came out of a need for young Vietnamese people to access the App Store. The Apple App Store is inaccessible to most Vietnamese because you need a credit card to be able to buy and pay for apps. And most Vietnamese, less than, I think, 2 or 3%, actually have credit cards. Most people here are unbanked. So
it's cash on delivery.
Yeah, exactly. So that service helps to facilitate and acts as a middleman for Vietnamese to be able to buy and purchase the apps legally from those app stores.
So you mentioned this company was doing web apps, like apps for other companies.
They're serving as an app platform.
Right.
And it's funny because before that they were just another iPhone shop, and they did a huge volume of business unlocking iPhones. And then but because the entrepreneur saw the need for people to use apps without having to go through the credit card process, he jumped on that as an opportunity, and I think it's been very successful for them.
So it's still very successful now.
Yes. And it's to date I haven't seen that model really successful anywhere else in the country. Maybe you have.
We've seen a bunch of marketplaces, but they usually struggle.
Yeah, exactly. So this to me is the first one that's really gotten some good traction.
It's interesting.
Anywhere in the world.
Right. So you've seen that, and then moving forwards, what do you see more? What kind of industry do you see really rising?
You know, I think one of the biggest challenges and this is true of any ecosystem actually, I've been working a lot lately with professors who specialize in ecosystem development, especially in developing countries, but also developed countries. And I think one of the biggest challenges that he's seen, and I see it here as well, is that most young Vietnamese, if they haven't been outside Vietnam, it's very hard for them to imagine what other people in other countries would want. They only know about local market and local marketing conditions and can develop solutions that can certainly be successful in this market. But Vietnam is only one country. And if you're going to become a really scalable, successful internet enterprise, you have to think global. And that has to be from the beginning.
Or at least Asian.
Yeah, or at least continental or regional. But you can't focus on only your home market.
Right.
And you look at any big U.S. company, Google, Facebook, a lot. And the majority of their subscribers and members come from outside the U.S. now.
So that was the one thing, how we started the tool last year. The idea was like, where is the next Silicon Valley? And then we came up with the idea that actually there's not going to be a next Silicon Valley. It should just make their own personality. Don't try to copy the Silicon Valley and just do copycats, and that's just not going to work out. The next Facebook will probably come out of Silicon Valley anyway. But so are there any examples of global companies coming out of Vietnam right now, tech companies? Do you have any example?
There's one that was started by an American Vietnamese actually, called Misfit Wearables, and so they're going to the wearables market, and they're based primarily in Vietnam, but their market is in the U.S. So they're trying to design and manufacture products that fit the U.S. market. So they're going head to head with the big guys like Nike, Fuel Band, and they have tremendous talent, and were able to successfully raise money several times from U.S. investors for their products and projects. So I think that to me is one of the first companies. There was another company that was recently just got I think $18 million in funding from the U.S. That actually started in the Start Center, was their first office,
right.
And right next door, and they just raised 18 mil for a product to help disrupt the big data industry, basically. And big data is one of the hot trends. And they've been working for a year on a specific kind of software component that will help to bridge the gap for small and medium businesses to be able to applied big data services to their business.
So it's interesting because what we've been seeing here, talking to entrepreneurs and people like you from the ecosystem, is that the main competitive advantage of the Ho Chi Minh, the Vietnamese ecosystem in general, is the availability of really amazing talents, like technical talents, which are hard to find even in the US. But it also seems to, like, most of them being a lot cheaper than anywhere else. Is that like a huge competitive advantage? Do you think that's what's could put Vietnamese ecosystem on a global scale?
I think that one, talent is definitely an advantage here. You're able to find extremely raw talent for very, very affordable prices compared to pretty much anywhere else in the world. And so if capital is a constraining factor, then Vietnam is definitely a good choice. If money is no object, then you may be able to hire as good or better devs in the US, but it will be extremely more expensive, and it's just going to raise the whole average for the area there, which is already very high. So I'd say that yes, the talent is definitely a consideration for startups, tech startups here, and I think it's going to become more so as the local talent gains access to the right amount, the right knowledge and resources that they need to improve themselves. That's what I see a lot of these young engineers, developers doing, is spending their nights and weekends not working on a startup necessarily, but learning new technologies, learning Ruby on Rails, and building things with those. And when you combine that willingness to not only learn, but then to actually build stuff, you start to have really, really great communities of makers and hackers that will emerge and just be superstar entrepreneurs in the next few years.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've seen a lot in India was the outsourcing legacy was really strong. So it was making it hard to push talents, tech talents, to actually create their own company. Vietnam, to a different extent, has an outsourcing legacy. Not as strong as India, but it does have one. It's becoming a hotter and hotter outsourcing spot. Do you think that's something that can impact on the willingness of people to become entrepreneurs, or that's a threat?
I think Vietnam has the technology scene since I got here. And my first company here actually was an IT outsourcing shop, so I'm very familiar with this syndrome. The top engineers and technical people will go to high-paid positions at top outsourcing firms. But as I said, their mindset, the Vietnamese mindset, is to work hard at your job, do a good job, but then at night and on the weekends, that's time for you. That's time for your own development, and it's time for developing your own business. And so when they have that in mind, they will quickly be able to learn how to spot the right opportunities and take that extra time they'll save up from their outsourcing job and then put everything they have into starting their own company based on some opportunity that they see.
So that's very common across a lot of devs that work in outsourcing companies.
That's what I've seen.
Little project on the side.
I'd say it's not everybody. I'd say maybe 50-50. But definitely the smarter ones. The smarter ones have that mind that they want to be their own boss at some point. They don't always want to work in a nice, safe company. Right. So that's a very different mindset than, and I think you mentioned this about Korea, Japan. I've seen the same thing in Singapore. Is that the general culture there is to stick to the the safety of a full-time job. You don't want to go out and then spend the rest of your time for having fun. Yeah. Here it's, I got the safe job and I'm going to save up either for my family or for starting my own company. And oftentimes it's, I want to start a company so that I can provide more for my family. Because the average salary here for even top outsourcing companies is still much, much lower than it is in India. Right. Or Singapore or any of those. So it's partly an economic factor as well. Do you know how much time smaller on average? I would say off the top of my head probably 3 times lower than in India, and probably 5 times lower than in Singapore.
Wow. And the quality is still very high.
Yes, same quality.
So where do they learn those skills? Is university doing that, or they learn on their own?
Oh, they definitely learn on their own because universities here, although I shouldn't say that they're not doing a good job. They're providing the fundamental skills that I think all engineers and technical people need. But definitely the way Vietnamese developers, especially that top 5 or 10%, are getting to the level that they are is because they're spending their own time digging and learning.
And what about the diaspora? That's something we talk a lot in most ecosystems we go to. Diaspora brings skills, talents, entrepreneurial spirit that they might have in the country, and capital.
Absolutely.
It's something you see a lot here.
Yes, a lot, definitely. There's a lot of Vietnamese, especially from the south, left after 75, and a lot of them went to the US and went to France. And a lot of them are coming back, and a lot of them, like myself, my mother is Vietnamese, my father's American, so I'm kind of a mix. But I've seen many overseas Vietnamese from the US and Europe coming back, starting companies, and working with the locals to build successful businesses. And again, the examples that I mentioned earlier, Misfit Wearables and Adatao is the big data company, are both a mix of Vietnamese, that top 5% Vietnamese who went abroad to study, got their higher degrees, masters, PhDs from the US, and came back and by working with people in the US or people in Europe to do the business development, they're able to secure funding and do great things.
Right, because the tech skills doesn't seem to be too much of a problem. The business skills, however, might be more of an issue.
Yeah. This is the challenge: is that management is still a very new subject in Vietnam, and the way management has been taught, and the way generally education here rolls out, is that it's about 10 or 15 years behind the average. What's being taught in the U.S. So in terms of education about entrepreneurship and innovation, there's been huge advances as far as what we know and what we practice in the U.S. We've had customer development, lean startup, effectuation, design thinking. These are all frameworks that have been designed and are taught at Harvard and Stanford, top institutions. So it's very easy for students, if you're a student at one of those top institutions, to gain access to that knowledge and best practices. Whereas here, that's still brand new. It's not been translated. It's not been effectively employed in any universities, and that's part of my job actually at Vietnam National University, is to really get in there and promote these newer frameworks that no one in the university has ever heard of. And so this is one of the side things that I do at the university, working with the Ministry of Science and Technology. We're actually trying to design and develop rigorous and comprehensive curriculum that can be disseminated not just to university students, but to entrepreneurs who are actually in the process of starting businesses. They're in the process of looking for those opportunities to make a big difference. And these frameworks will be invaluable to those people.
You'd say there is no Vietnamese copy of business model generation or lean startup methodology?
There are translated copies now, but they're not widely spread or taught from. So again, those most enterprising entrepreneurs who can either read English well, they've gone abroad to study and happen to pick up those books, will gain access to it, but the translated versions are very poorly done for the most part. And so I think conceptually the translations aren't good enough to get all of the points across, and there aren't discussion groups about it online, there aren't people meeting and like there would be in the US. There's very few. We tried to do a couple startup weekends and we were looking at doing like lean startup machines here, but the demand from the local audience is still not to that level because they just aren't aware of those frameworks, and to them they don't add any value. And again, it's not because that they aren't applicable, but it's because people here just don't understand and don't get the same examples that that young entrepreneurs in the U.S. Are reading about every day on blogs.
Even though I'd say that the lean methodology would really fit Vietnamese people a lot, because the people we've met, I'm just thinking about a winner, for example, Trip Me that won the competition on Saturday. I was discussing with Ha, the CEO and founder.
Yes.
And she was saying that they started the company with just a few $1,000s, and they got offers for like $500,000 investment and refused it. They were just like, we just want to bootstrap it, keep bootstrapping and keep it lean. And then I told them about the lean methodology, and they actually didn't know about it. But they had it in their mind; they were doing it without knowing it's the lean methodology.
Yep.
So people have this mindset already.
That's the funny thing, is that there are some people who, through their own life experiences, have figured out, how to start business, and those are the ones who are like fish in water, right? So like the winner of the contest, she was clearly knew what she was doing, and
she showed it to us.
But then those are in the very far minority, and in a way, it's because of the way management has been taught here, because the way management was taught in the U.S. 15 years ago led to the burst of the dot-com bubble, and Lean Startup actually was a response to that. Lean Startup came out of the pent-up frustration of so many internet entrepreneurs who and investors who were left kind of high and dry back in 2001, and it took several years for that methodology to kind of catch on, but. What's being taught, again, because the education system here is 10 or 15 years behind the time, students who go and study business in the top business programs here are getting curriculum that's, for the most part, outdated and doesn't even, think about, I specialize in teaching entrepreneurship, so I see what kind of curriculum is being taught in these entrepreneurship courses. And I do my best to say, we threw that out a long time ago. This is what we're teaching now. But I'm just one guy, so it's tough for me to reach the whole country of 90 million people. So it's a start though. We're starting.
So audience knows, like, Vietnam is a massive market. I don't think a lot of people realize that it's 90 million people. Right. The biggest country in Europe is, in terms of population, is Germany. It's less than that. So it's one of the biggest markets in Southeast Asia, right after China and Japan. Right? It's definitely bigger than any of the neighbors.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I found interesting, you were mentioning, Misfit and another company that Adatel. They raised several $1 million rounds, but that money came from the US. Nothing came from Vietnam. What's the investment landscape like in Vietnam? How do I get investment if I'm an entrepreneur here?
This has been always one of the biggest challenges, and I think it's not that for lack of trying. I think that there are three major VC funds here. They are IDG, as you know, Vina Capital has DFJ Ventures, and then CyberAgent Ventures from Japan. And so they all have multi-million-dollar funds. And some of them have started back as early as 2004, trying to invest in startups in Vietnam. And I think in the beginning they were pursuing the more traditional model, which presumes that there will be some kind of an exit at some point, right? And so that's where the problem comes in. Exits in Vietnam are very, very few and far between. So if your goal is to have a big, scalable company based in Vietnam, your chances of an IPO or any kind of acquisition are 0.00001%.
Right.
It's very challenging, and there have been several exits over the last probably 5 years. I'd say maybe one per year in terms of tech company exiting. Wow. But so that's the biggest challenge for getting funding from Vietnamese investors. So I started an angel group here, kind of an informal group back in 2010, and getting together with a number of wealthy individuals who were looking at investing in startups in Vietnam. And we saw this as the biggest challenge. We met maybe once or twice a month, had dinners, and would invite entrepreneurs to come and talk to us, pitch their ideas, people that we knew in our networks. And we saw a lot of different opportunities, but most of them were very small in scale, not something that would return a 20 to 35x multiple. So, and again, this was because we would always ask at the end of every conversation, where's the exit going to be? who's going to be the acquirer? How is this going to possibly go to IPO? And it's just so challenging because the market for IPO and even M&A in Vietnam is so sticky in terms of regulation. The stock markets here have been operational for less than 10 years. And given the stock markets in the US and Europe have been around for 100, it's just a very new concept for most Vietnamese. And that's also part of the reason why a lot of Vietnamese entrepreneurs don't even understand the concept of equity and or valuation. It's very hard for them to conceive of a company having an innate value that's based on some market pricing mechanism, just because no companies here are like that. There's a few on the stock market, but most of them were state-owned or just huge, government-backed kind of conglomerates.
It's like the cat eating its own tails, because if you don't get investment, no chance you get acquired. If you don't if you don't look like you're going to get acquired, you're not going to get investment. So how do you get out?
So it's a chicken or egg.
How do you get out of that? What's your solution?
So this was the challenge, and I think that in the end it's going to be that the answer will come from outside Vietnam. And the laws in Vietnam governing equity and ownership are still very skewed towards favoring the local shareholder. And so it puts international shareholders at a severe disadvantage when they're co-investing into a Vietnamese entity. The solution for this is to incorporate offshore, and where there are international investment laws.
Singapore.
Yeah. Singapore, Hong Kong, British Virgin Islands, BVI companies, or U.S. And so in my angel group, what we've kind of settled on as a strategy for this is to actually, because our target, our connections and our relationships are all Silicon Valley based, and most of us are U.S. citizens, our strategy is to not even incorporate offshore, but incorporate onshore in the U.S., because that's where we see the eventual exit happening. If we're shooting for that, big, huge, scalable return and a global market, why go anywhere else?
Right.
The U.S. and Silicon Valley in particular is the hotbed for this kind of.
So acquisition would come from a U.S. company.
Yeah, or IPO.
An IPO would be done, because I think I read recently that Alibaba.com, for example, is going IPO pretty much now, but Jack Ma is doing it on the Nasdaq. Not actually in China. So that's something you'd see Vietnamese companies doing IPO in the US.
Yeah, and China is a great example too. I mean, they're doing it for the same reason, is because the money in the global market isn't risk averse enough to invest in a China only play. They trust the U.S. markets. They trust the U.S. System to protect them from, and so it's seen as a less risky venture to IPO or to do anything in the U.S. Really.
We wish you the best of luck, and we hope to have the event organized there next year.
Yes, I hope so.
Ho Chi Minh this time.
It's a pleasure having you guys here.
That'd be great.